to start with kind of a framing question of, given the importance in formulating a budget that property tax increases are, and the fact that the budget is dominated by compensation, by teacher compensation, what was the reason why the board would not, with good budget prudence, have decided to wait until the July 1st property tax numbers became public, rather than adopt a budget 2 weeks earlier and adopt a union contract a month earlier that committed it to what it did?
That's a good question. I think that the budget we completed in June was for the previous year, and so we could have resolved that budget right in August after we got the numbers of the previous year, but we decided to do something a bit historic this year, which was try a multi-year compensation contract. We hadn't done that in the past. This was a thought brought to us by Dr. McGee, so that we would pay teachers before the year they work, as opposed to retroactively at the end of the year. And luckily, we, conservative budgeting, decided to put in trigger language so that the third year would be reopened, and the second year, the off schedule would go away if property taxes came in at 1.5% above or below what we had budgeted. Which is what happened. So the multi-year contract handled the previous year, which was 2015-16, and then the current year, 2016-17, which meant now, so moving forward, we're now negotiating for the year that will happen as opposed to the end of the year that just happened. Does that make sense?
I understand that, but that doesn't really answer the question. And you said that the June budget you adopted was for the last fiscal year?
Well, yes, was for, because we're closing out the books for 15-16, and we're adopting the budget for the current 16-17 year. So we actually do two at the same time, right?
Right, but what you adopted in June of this year was the 16-17 budget.
Yes.
And it was predicated on substantial increases in property taxes.
Right.
So my question is, everybody knew that that was the wild card in the budget.
Yes.
Why not wait for 2 weeks until you actually have hard numbers to work with?
So when we hired Max, we asked him to bring his innovations and new ideas to our district, and that's what he has done in many, many areas. And this was something he brought to the board, saying, I've done this before. One of the ideas behind it was that compensation would be settled, and then anything that came in additionally in property taxes could be used for additional programs or other areas we wanted to put money into. And so it would sort of separate, rather than have a big pot of money at the end, when we get the numbers, and then we have to sort of negotiate.
But you're referring to the 3-year contract and the timing of adopting the union contract. The union contract that you adopted in May, just 6 weeks before you found out that you didn't have the money for that contract, could have simply been held until July 10th after you had that information, with no deleterious effects on the teachers. They don't even return to work until August.
Right, but the teachers were waiting to be paid that whole year.
Right, but 6 weeks would have avoided the situation you're in.
And hindsight is 20/20.
Okay.
So we have to decide if we want to move forward with a single year budgeting again, like we did before.
Except the question isn't so much the 3-year budget, the 3-year teacher contract. It's the timing of not having the information that you need to adopt a budget or adopt a contract. So I guess the question that leads to is, had you known in May, when you adopted the teacher contract, what you now know, how would that have affected your vote and your thinking about it?
Oh, it would have changed it entirely.
In what way?
Well, our property taxes came in 3% lower than what we had budgeted. So we certainly would have figured that in and made different decisions.
So do you mean that had you known that, you would have negotiated a lower increase for the teachers?
Of course, yeah.
So if that's the case, then why would you not take steps just 6 weeks later to correct that where you could, especially in the area of non-union compensation?
I think that's tough because that's the history of the district. You're talking about the administrator salaries?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All the non-union salaries. Because obviously once you approve a union contract,
right.
You're stuck with it.
This is historically the way that we've done the contracts in our district. And interestingly, hadn't come up in the 4 years that I've been on the board. So now, of course, we have more information, and I think the board, I know the majority of the board, and myself included, want to look at how we do administrator salaries in the future and differentiate it from how we do our union contract negotiations. So I think you're going to see that change.
And that was to have been on the board for discussion in September. That was what was promised back in June, but that hasn't happened. What is the status of looking at new methods of arriving at pay levels for non-union personnel?
That's going to come before the board. I don't remember saying it was going to happen in September, but certainly it will.
And what do you support in terms of that?
I support changing it.
Well, but how?
Oh, well, I think we need to look at how we evaluate our administrators because it's complex in the same way it's complex with teachers. And it can't just be based on achievement data of the students because you can't control what students in a public school district come into your classroom and in your school. So how do you look at that? We need to make sure that the administrators and their leads, so the district administrators, talk amongst themselves in terms of how do we come up with consistent, high-quality evaluations for our leaders. Because these are our instructional leads on the site, right? They need to create not only the school climate for the families, but all the high-quality teaching and learning that happens on each school site. And so we need to make sure that they feel supported and they feel like there's areas for them to grow and they feel like there's good evaluation systems in place. I think that's actually been something that we have needed to pay attention to for a while. Our evaluation systems actually all the way through. And I do think Dr. McGee has brought some new energy towards that. He brought all the principals together at the beginning of last year, and no, maybe it was this year, and took some teacher evaluations, some of which were excellent, some were good, and some needs improvement, and then he took out sort of what the final evaluation comment was and the names and everything, and then handed them around and said, now you tell me which one of these is good, which one needs improvement, which is excellent, and they couldn't always identify them. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was a way of showing the principals, all right, so how do you evaluate teachers, and what are you looking for? What are the metrics and outcomes? I thought that was an excellent exercise to at least show to them that when you use too vague of language, then are you really helping teachers improve and work towards continuous improvement? So I think we need to do that with our district administrators. We need to make sure they're supporting our principals in the way the principals are going to be supported towards continuous improvement and goals.
So evaluation, of course, is different than compensation, and evaluations is already taking place of principals on an annual basis.
Not always.
And
not always.
Well, that's another issue. If that's the case.
Yeah, that is the case.
I don't know why that would be, but in any case, the whole concept of these Me Too races, which without any discussion and without anything based on the performance of these people, they get exactly the same increase that you've negotiated with the teachers. I gather from what you're saying is you support moving away from that.
Yes.
I guess my question is, you and the other incumbent in this race have served on the board, in your case, for 4 years, and in her case for 9 years. You've gone through this now at least 3 times, if not 4 times. Why is this just now surfacing as an issue?
I think these types of issues surface when there's a shortfall, right? A budget shortfall. There hasn't been one in the 4 years that I've been on the board. There was one in 09, 010, and I'm not sure why it wasn't brought up at that point. But I think The opportunity when you have a budget shortfall is to look at your systems, to look at the things that you've added. We've added $13 million in programs and resources since I've been on the board. Well, now let's look at those. How are they benefiting students? You can look at the things that you've put in place and see if you want to continue them or if you want to scale them back.
Well,
So I think you take stock more, maybe, on the money outlay when you have a budget shortfall.
you are aware of the Me Too impacts of all of your approvals of those,
Yes.
of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very valid point and a very valid question. And I can only say, looking back at it, is when you are not faced with a budget shortfall, you tend not to look at those areas quite as closely.
You mentioned at our debate last week, when we were talking about the Me Too raises for administrators, that it's really important to look at comparable data and what other districts pay and making sure that Palo Alto is staying competitive in terms of that. And that data did actually come to the board, but it was fairly recently.
Yeah.
What comparable data in terms of administrator salaries did the board look at before adopting the contract?
We didn't look at comparable data for administrators. That was definitely a problem area. And I'm glad it's been brought out to our attention, so now we can make sure that we ask for that moving forward. That's critical.
One area of clarity that I'd like to get around is union negotiations and transparency. So I guess the contract negotiations are theoretically open to the public unless both sides vote to close them. However, whenever we've sent a reporter to a meeting, it's been closed. So I want to ask for your opinion on whether or not there should be public hearings or whether there's justifiable reasons why they should be closed.
I absolutely think that they should be public. There's no doubt about it. I'm all about transparency. I would like so much more transparency. I think I'm thrilled that we finally have BPRC now, that it has agendas and minutes, and it's open, and it's a standing meeting rather than an ad hoc meeting, and the public can come and talk, at least to 2 school board members who are on that with issues that come on. I just think it's better for our community, healthier, the more open we are about things. And I also think, particularly with negotiations, that teachers and parents want what's best for students. Now, we may have different ideas about that, but until you air those out and talk about them and talk about trade-offs and everybody knows the same information, you can't make good decisions.
But your negotiator, though, Scott Bowers, requested that those meetings be closed. So how does that jive with what you just said?
Well, I think they should be open, and I'll be making that clear as we move forward. And we've talked about it, in terms of our negotiation conversations. So I have advocated for that, and will continue to advocate for that.
I know you have a follow-up, but just another quick follow-up. On the issue of transparency, which I appreciate your thoughts on that, as board president, you have the ability to schedule public discussion of the board's views towards the contract well before you are in a position to vote for it in closed session, leaving the public basically not much opportunity to influence it. And earlier, and when asked about this, I guess in the debate, you said, well, there's been lots of public discussion about all the programs and services and so forth, and that was the public's opportunity to give its input on negotiations with our union. I don't quite see how that has anything to do with our approach to negotiating a contract with the union or what issues should be a part of that contract, not the least of which, of course, is the pay levels in the contract. So if transparency is good, then why not have regular monthly public meetings where the board updates the public on its thinking about the contract and the progress of the negotiations?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I haven't thought about that. I don't remember the comment you're referring to that I made in the debate I don't remember us talking about negotiations in the debate. Did we talk about negotiations in particular?
I don't know
Okay.
if it was about negotiations in particular.
Okay.
It was about public input into that process, I think. But
Yeah, maybe what I was saying was public input in terms of looking at our programs and resources that we've added and where the public sees the benefit and what we might want to scale back. Maybe that was that conversation. But in terms of negotiations and having monthly conversations, that would be interesting. Yeah, because we could talk about shared interests moving forward and different approaches.
Well, because what happened this year, of course, is that you all voted in closed session by a vote that we won't know what it was, to approve a contract that then had a required public hearing in public at a school board meeting, and you have one of your colleagues opposing the contract for the first time in many, many years. And then you have the union rep there saying, this is a crazy place to be raising an objection. But it's the first place that an objection could have been raised. So you've got a system that doesn't permit even discussion in public among the board members until you've already made a decision.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, that's definitely something we have to look at moving forward in terms of our practices. I don't remember any conversations from any board member about not spending the money we thought was coming in. Mm-hmm. We had differences of opinion on how to spend that, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't think anybody predicted that the property taxes would come in as low as
No, I wasn't suggesting that.
Okay. Yeah, but I do think, I think it is awkward to have it then. I like your idea much better in terms of having the conversations all along so that it doesn't seem odd towards the end of a year of negotiations to then come out with it. And I can't share if he even shared that before during negotiations or if he waited till that meeting to bring it up. So
would you be in favor of having some sort of public hearing on the exact terms prior to ratification by the teachers union? Because it seems like that's a real crux, of the time when things are actually settled but not set in stone per se by the union or in the union's mind.
I don't know why it has to be so secretive. I mean, we're talking about our teachers that we want to support. We're talking about our students that we want to support. Everybody should have buy-in in terms of the contract. So, yeah, I mean, definitely move forward with that. Yeah, I'm going to think about ways in which we can do that.
You can jump to another decision that's been really significant during your time on the board. 2 years ago, you voted to develop a resolution against, that strongly criticized the Office for Civil Rights following, some of its investigations into allegations of bullying in Palo Alto schools, and that committed the district to a national lobbying effort and to reform the federal agency. And it also alleged that a Palo Alto parent had illegally tampered with documents in one of those cases. What has become of this lobbying campaign, and do you continue to believe that this was a good decision?
So, what has become of it? Nothing. No one has talked about it in 2 years as far as a national lobbying campaign. The letter. When I went back and reread it, it's...
Which letter are you referring to?
The letter.
Resolution.
The resolution. It was written in anger in a time where the district felt under siege. And it was a reflection of that time. Looking back on it now, I think it's completely out of date. And whenever OCR comes back with the 2 outstanding cases, which I don't know when it will happen, I think we should write a new letter in terms of our new correspondence with them. I think every case that's come up on the horizon since then has been handled well. Dr. McGee had 1 or 2 since he's been here that have been fine. They've answered his phone calls fine. We're the longest non-closed cases in, I think, the state of California right now. You may want to look that up to verify it, but that's what I hear. There are probably, I think, about 80 cases still open, but we're the longest running. I don't know why we don't have a timeline for when that's going to come in. Dr. McGee tried to call them for early resolution or some sort of resolution several times, and they've said no. This is being handled out of the DC office, not the local San Francisco office. we don't know why it can't be transferred there. We don't answer those questions. But that has not stopped us from moving forward with policies, procedures, administrative regulations in place to support our students. So I'm looking forward to the next time we can have a conversation with them. But that letter is out of date now.
So it may be very much out of date now, but nevertheless, you voted to support it
Yep. twice.
I mean, you expressed your views very passionately at 2 different meetings in June of 2014. I'm wondering, in hindsight then, you're saying that resolution came out of anger. Whose anger did it reflect? And why was that not addressed in that context?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's always hard to think when you're right in the situation. And I think OCR also went through some changes at that same time where they were becoming more active on college campuses, becoming more active in high schools around the country. And I think they were in the news a lot more. There was really just a push at that time, and I think Palo Alto was certainly one of the biggest places in which that push was happening. I think we had advocacy group that was very passionate about it and was directing people on how to file the claims as well. And so it was just a time in which, I think anger is a good word. There was a lot of anger at the district. There was a lot of frustration at the district, and OCR complicated that and was brought in. The largest number of cases filed that we've ever seen. So it was an interesting time. I don't think that had happened before. I mean, we've certainly had OCR cases before. They never got that much attention. And since they never got that. It was that time. That was a reflection of that time.
Well, the district received findings that found that discrimination had occurred at one of its middle schools, so it's understandable why it would receive a lot of attention.
Of course.
I don't want to lose Elena's question about the document tampering, because very serious charges that one of your complainants had broken the law were made by the entire board in that resolution. And as you know, since then, the documents that you eventually got from OCR showed that that was not the case. And I've yet to hear an apology from anyone on the board to that individual who repeatedly was accused of document tampering. Are you prepared to apologize? Do you think the board should apologize? You've got a resolution that's still on the books that accuses one of your constituents of illegal behavior.
Mm-hmm. So I haven't looked at all of the paperwork in a long time, so I'd have to go through it again.
You're still not sure whether there was document tampering?
We were shown the 2 changed documents at the time, and it seemed clear that they had been changed. So I would have to go back and make sure there was documentation that showed that wasn't true. But I haven't heard from anyone, and I don't know if this constituent, I'd be happy to talk to them, but I don't.
Well, this relates to the documents that the school board spent months trying to wrestle from OCR in your
Right.
Freedom of Information Act request. And OCR finally gave you those documents, and the facts of the matter are that the email that you thought was tampered with was not. It was cut and pasted into another document. It was an inadvertent mistake. So, but it sounds as if you're not even convinced or aware that that's the case. So this is still in your mind dangling out there as an uncertain.
Yeah, I just have to go back and look at the paperwork. I really haven't thought about this in a while.
if you had been accused of illegally tampering with documents, you probably want someone to have pronounced you not guilty if that was the case. To follow up a little bit further on the OCR, when the board first dealt with the Terman case and the findings came out, the board committed to having an open discussion of how this happened, what the ramifications were, and that never happened. The only open discussion that occurred at the board was on this resolution, which was critical of OCR. Why was the board so reluctant to actually probe what happened and be transparent about its efforts to find out what occurred with that case of Terman?
Do you mean in terms of an investigation of that particular case?
Well, the investigation had already occurred by OCR, but
Right.
what was left completely unaddressed, unless you were dealing with it in closed session, and what was committed to was a public discussion of how did this happen? What were the things that led up to this happening? What were the teachings, the learnings that could happen from it? Where did we go wrong? That never occurred.
I don't think that's fair. I think we actually did have conversations. It may not have been in this particular case, but we definitely looked at our systems around bullying prevention. We looked at our systems around special ed services. We looked at our systems around teacher training and administrators handling of complaints. We put administrative regulations in place in terms of how you escalate incidents that happen, what are the steps. We put in due process steps. I think we did a lot of work that came out of that, actually.
I wanted to address the very troubling achievement gap that still persists in the district. There was a Minority Achievement Development Committee, and they issued their 12 recommendations last year. And some of those members are frustrated with the pace of implementation of their recommendations. One of those 3 policy areas was laning, and there was a discussion about laning in March with no particular action that resulted out of that. So I want to ask you what your opinion is of the progress that's being made so far on the achievement gap, and then also what steps you would recommend for getting this laning discussion going such that there can be a consensus and some action.
Yes. All good questions. So, the Minority Achievement Talent Development Task Advisory Committee was great. I think, again, Dr. McGee brought this in his first year, one of his first committees, to look at this very important issue and to look at our whole district through a lens of equity. I fought very hard, as you probably recall, for full-day kindergarten, which was one of the things talked about in the recommendations. We hired a director of equity who's now working on that. We did a lot of unconscious bias training for our teachers. This is another recommendation. We're looking at our RTI models and how we catch things earlier. We're looking at intervention, and we've actually put money towards literacy intervention, math intervention specialists. Part of the $13 million that we've been adding over the past 4 years has been for these interventionists. And so I'm fully committed to implementing the suggestions with fidelity. Laning and tracking, hot button issue in our community. We did our laning study session before we talked about the combining of Algebra 1 and 1A to lay the groundwork for having this conversation. And I think it was clear, and certainly clear to me, that if teachers want to try different things and innovate and try pilots around combining classes, as long as there are supports for the students who need it, because I don't want to take away supports and hide kids in a classroom where they won't be singled out. I want to make sure there's supports within that class structure. Then we should allow them to do that. So I voted for it, and it is happening right now. We also did a combination in English at Palo, and we've asked for a follow-up report because that's been an extra year implemented. So I'm hoping to receive those results soon. And with the algebra, we're going to look at it mid-year, so at the semester, and if we need to make any corrections, then we can do it before the year is done. So we built that in as well.
So this is a site-based approach to learning right now. What is the ultimate goal of that? Because you don't want a lack of equity because some people are experimenting with moving people together and others aren't.
Yeah, so there's a difference of opinions around learning in this community. And I can see that at the secondary level, it is nice to have some choices for students in terms of where they want to, how far they want to go in certain areas like math, for example. We have many different choices for math. Whether we lane in 7th grade or not, I don't know why we keep kids all together until 7th grade when we decide kids are suddenly different. Especially if we have an overarching goal of all kids doing algebra by 8th grade. It feels to me random that we would separate them in 7th grade. A very compelling student came to speak to us at the board level about expanding TEAM and SLC, which are the transition programs to our high schools. And he said, you know, this was a way for me to get back together with my social peer group because I was de-laned from my peer group in 7th grade. I mean, how awful is that for children to be de-laned from their peer group? It's awful. So if that's not working for our students, then we have to change it. And I'm not convinced that the research shows that at those levels, the laning makes a huge difference. So I would very much be interested in having that conversation.
Special education is another major topic in the district. And last year, the district commissioned a group of Harvard University researchers to come in and do an in-depth study of special ed services in the entire department. And the board discussed the preliminary results of that at your retreat this past summer. And it was sort of a mixed bag. There were some positive findings for sure, but the researchers also wrote that currently, quote, currently having a disability in PAUSD is associated with academic failure. And at your discussion of this, one of your colleagues, Melissa Baden-Caswell, said, quote, our culture right now is let your kid fail. Do you agree with that statement? Why or why not?
Yes, I think that happens more often than it should. That kids have to struggle before we offer services. I think as we put more early interventionists in place, though, we can access different supports early enough on that we can avoid that, that they have to fail before they get access to special ed services. The thing that I found most interesting about that report is that parents don't feel heard. Parents don't feel heard. Parents don't feel as involved in this process as they should be. Parents are with children a lot more than teachers are with children. And they need to be on par with teacher discussions in terms of what a child needs. I have a son with a 504, so I've been in these IEP/504 meetings. They don't need to be adversarial. I think it's always sensitive when you're talking about your child and what you want for your child, and it is a public school district and we do have finite dollars. So we do need to figure out how to make those dollars work as best as we can. And parents need to feel heard. And parents need to understand what the barriers are to access and how we can best utilize all the services we can provide to meet the greatest number of students' needs as possible. So I would like to see a parent advisory group started in our district. This would be parents from PTA, from PI, from special ed, from PASS, from all of the different English language learners, from all the different groups, BTP students. And this would meet quarterly or every other month to discuss sort of what are the biggest issues facing the parent, as the parent community sees it. And we could utilize that format to help us stay on our strategic plan goals, make sure we have strong focused goals, make sure we're meeting our LCAP goals. Other districts have done this. Berkeley Unified has a great PAG, they call it Parent Advisory Group, that meets regularly and that advises the board on sort of the pulse of the parent community. We have committees that are formed for various issues, but we don't have a general group that brings all the parents together who are interested, and this would be open public meetings, so a parent could come just to hear or add whatever their issue of the day is, that would advise the board. So I'd like to see more ways in which parents can be involved. I also met with Terry Baldwin last week to talk about how we can strengthen the teacher-parent partnership so that we don't come to the end of a process and feel like we're on different sides of an issue. As is often the case, very frustrating over time to see this. And we talked about the site council model. You know, the site councils at the sites are half parent, half teachers. And to have a district level site council. So the site councils would meet district-wide a couple of times a year so that teachers and parents could be involved with what are the big issues going on in our sites. In this way, we work towards this collective community rather than a collection of communities that Dr. McGee talks about a lot. And we increase communication and transparency across the district in both the teacher-parent way and then also have this parent advisory group. So those are two ideas that I really want to work on this community that I've reelected.
There are a couple of things that you have advocated for that haven't come to pass, and I wanted to just mention, get your response to a couple of them. Mm-hmm. One was when you were running 4 years ago and subsequent to being elected, you were a very strong advocate for creating uniform bullying prevention policies. You correctly pointed out that at our elementary schools, we've got a whole panoply of different programs, and you believed very strongly at the time that we needed to approach these with a best practice mindset. That, of course, has not happened, in spite of that being your position. And I think I heard you say on last Tuesday that at the debate that you've since come to decide that the site-based approach to those programs was the better approach. Did I hear that correctly? And if so, could you expand on it? Okay, I did not. So please then address the question of
Absolutely.
Why is it that we still don't have a uniform best practice?
Glad to. Happy to talk about it. So first, I think what I said at the debate was what I've learned in 4 years is that it's very difficult to share best practices in this community, but it's easier to grow best practices at the individual sites. So maybe that comment was sort of what you heard about that.
Doing a lot of growing, haven't we?
Yes, we have. I know, which is actually amazing. We're growing this Tighten Connect program with the teacher advisory group, which, that was another big issue that I wanted to have happen. So to finally see it come to fruition is great. Okay, so bullying. So I was lucky enough to be on BPRC when we did the bullying policy and the administrative regulation around bullying. We developed a bullying incident report form. So there were no systems in place that were consistent in terms of reporting bullying or even defining bullying, which I fought very hard for, to have a consistent definition, how we handle those incidents, what's the due process around them. This all came from good of the OCR being here and in raising these issues and more in terms of our universal procedure and things like that. So that was initially consistency work, right? How we want to make sure we have the right bullying policy, the right administrative regulations, the right bullying incident programs. Then it became about social emotional curriculum. And then what I realized is it went beyond the elementary schools to the middle schools and to the high schools, not having consistency in approach. and then thinking about living skills, which is sort of one area in which they talk about some of these social skills developments, and whether that curriculum needed to be looked at. So it turned into sort of a larger issue. And then it came back to what's evidence-based out there. And so I was talking with Brenda Carrillo probably a year or so ago about how do we do some research, or what are the maybe 3 or 4 evidence-based SEL programs out there. Work with CASEL or one of the other big national groups that's working on social emotional learning. And then say, okay, the schools can make their individual choices of which of these programs will work in their communities, but they're all evidence-based. So at least we have that going. And so she came up with this idea of the SEL committee, which is working right now in terms of doing that kind of work, looking at social emotional curriculum, what do we want in each program to sort of address, and then they will come back with these recommendations. And then if the board adopts, okay, these 3 or 4 are what we would want, then the schools will follow. So I realized you have to approach it in different ways, more systemic, more start with the policies and the procedures in terms of the BPs and the ARs, and then figure out sort of what your ultimate goals are as a district, and then provide choice so that each school can grow their own program. So it's really been a learning curve for me in these last 4 years to figure out how to move the big ship, right? The big ship moves slowly. But I finally feel like I'm confident enough about how things change here that I can pull the right levers to make things happen. So
thank you.
Sorry.
The other example, which is totally different type of thing, is
Sure.
that you strongly objected and pushed to eliminate the option for teachers to keep kids in from recess in elementary school. And you just got beaten back by your colleagues who insisted at Superintendent Skelly's urging to retain that, even though the law now forbids it, as an option if the safety of students is at stake. But you were very firm and strong at BPRC about believing that evidence-based data out there showed that this was about the worst thing you could do to a misbehaving kid, was to keep them in the classroom while all the other kids were out at recess. Why did you lose that battle, and why did that just sort of vanish from the picture?
So I don't consider that a loss, actually. I mean, it became cannot keep in a child for recess unless there's the sort of the safety of the child.
Well, sure.
Okay.
That opens up a complete, and then all the teacher needs to do is to be able to say, yeah.
But they would have to prove that that's a safety issue. Actually, what I've heard from teachers on the site level is quite the opposite, is, well, I can't keep them in from recess, so I need to figure out another way of behavior modification in the classroom. That is what I've heard from teachers. So it actually did filter down, and when I do my liaison visits, I always try to do a teacher brown bag lunch each semester, so that I can hear from teachers how our board policies filter down from them. And that's one which I actually consider a win, because I heard the teachers' feedback saying, well, we're looking at different ways of doing behavior modification or restorative justice or other sorts of things in the classroom. So I see it a little differently than you do.
Well, I'm looking at it from a policy adoption standpoint,
right,
rather than how it's got implemented.
Yeah, sometimes
and the policy became fuzzy, but it sounds as though it had an impact.
It really
nevertheless.
did.
Yeah.
It really did. And I think, there's the art of compromise when you come to that.
So this district has a unique conundrum in that it has an embarrassment of wealthy donors who want to give to various schools. Of course, if it's a significant donation, that raises questions about parity, also accountability and transparency. And I'm interested in your views on how to balance the desire to continue getting these donations and improve our facilities with some of the wrinkles that necessarily need to accompany a donation. I understand there's a proposed policy right now, if a donor gives in excess of $50,000 and prefers to be anonymous, the superintendent shall ascertain the identity of the donor and inform the board in confidence, and that requirement can be waived in a public meeting. What are your feelings about around this transparency issue, and how important is it that the donor can be anonymous?
So I'm not a big fan of the anonymous donation. You know, that's surprising. That's surprising. But transparency, it's a public school district, and it's public schools, and it's, so I don't believe it should be anonymous. I know, though, from my colleagues who have dealt with large donors in their other fields that people have a wide variety of reasons they want to be anonymous for some reason or another. I think we would have to tread very, very carefully around that. And I'm already uncomfortable about the S and donation being anonymous. And I've said that in a public meeting. I've said I'm uncomfortable with doing this. When this board policy that you're referring to, that hasn't come before the full board, and I'm not a BPRC anymore, you know, I don't think I can support it.
What is the level of knowledge right now of the Addison donor and his or her wishes?
They're anonymous.
There's a third party representative, correct, that's communicating.
Yeah, but nobody knows.
But nobody knows who that is,
Donor.
not the superintendent or anyone, and that makes me uncomfortable.
So along this transparency thing, since we're on that theme, your district administrative policy right now is to redact the names of people that correspond to board members about issues coming before the board at meetings. So in other words, when we get copies of emails that have been sent to board members, not about their kid, not about anything other than something coming before the board, the names of those people is redacted. So the public has no idea who you're hearing from, who's attempting to influence your decisions, what their points of view are. I know of no other public agency that does that.
Yeah.
Are you aware of that policy, and do you support it?
So what I would like to see us do, and I've mentioned this in the past, is move to the City of Palo Alto model, where whenever anyone writes to the city, it's very clear right there. It says your email will be public record, it will be posted. Don't even write here if you don't want it public. I don't know why we don't have that. That is like critical for me. I have a meeting actually set up with our communications manager, and that's something I wanted to bring up because that is every letter that comes to us should be published. And I think we started doing a better job of putting them at the end of the board packets when people write in,
yeah.
right? But that's been sort of
Hit and miss.
right, totally hit or miss.
Yeah.
So I have believed that from the beginning. When I was first running and I wanted to meet with the city council members just to get their endorsements, I had to do that. I had to submit it, and I was like, well, everyone should know I'm running for office, you know. I like that. I mean, you know, I was a journalist for many years, so I don't know about that, but yeah, no, I'm with you on that. For sure.
So to shift gears here, when we're talking about policies, there is a likely grooming policy that's going to come before the board that is a reaction to the various sexual harassment issues that have occurred at Palo Alto High School. What is your view of that? Are you supportive of such a policy, and how far should it go?
So I haven't seen it. Have you seen it in BPRC yet?
Well, there's been various
Just
proposals and drafts.
I don't think an official.
Yeah.
So when I can tell you when I was on BPRC, it was brought forward, and we had an initial conversation with our attorney at the BPRC meeting. Were you there when Harold?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and he said that was illegal, or that we couldn't do that in our board policy because grooming was not defined by the state as a legal term. So I don't know if that's changed in terms of the word grooming.
Well, And I don't mean that the word grooming needs to be in
Right, right,
policy. I'm addressing the issue of teacher contact with students and
Absolutely.
what's appropriate and what isn't appropriate. I'm wondering what you believe where is that line?
Right. Well, the safety of our students is number one. I mean, we have to make sure that our schools are safe. And I think we have definitely improved our sexual harassment training, and we've involved all the teachers and the administrators in terms of talking about that on their sites and how they do that. But I think we need more specific language around what is and isn't acceptable. For example, I think I brought this up in the debate, social media is a realm in which we haven't done a lot of exploration. So some teachers are friends, I say Facebook friends, with their students. Some teachers use Facebook groups for their classes so that the students can work on projects together and things like that. I mean,
So what would you like to see? I mean, you've now gone through a principal at Palo Alto High School that has been terminated eventually. You've got 2 other teachers that have had allegations made against them. By now you must have some sense of what you support.
Yeah, I support firmer regulations.
But what?
And so those will look different. We need something around social media. We need guidelines in terms of whether a teacher or student can be in the classroom alone or not together.
But what I'm looking for is what your views are on those. I know we need all those things, but should teachers and students be permitted by district policy to be alone in the classroom together? Yes or no?
I don't think so.
Okay, should they be able to go out and have lunch together?
Don't think so.
Any socializing outside of the classroom?
Not outside of the classroom. No, not while they're a student. Absolutely not.
And what about after they graduate?
Well, after they graduate, we don't have control over them. So we have to make sure that we have clear guidelines in place while they're a student. I also think that one area in which we need to think more carefully about is student training. How to recognize when you're feeling uncomfortable, who you can go to when you're not feeling well. How do you find the supports you need when you feel like a line is being crossed or you feel uncomfortable in any way. And so that's what I'd like to develop also, because I think the students themselves could be good advocates in this area.
Can you help us understand, help the community understand what your thinking was in allowing Phil Winston to go teach in a middle school classroom after the allegations that had been made and sustained by the school district occurred?
Yeah, that was such a tough situation. I don't remember anyone feeling like we wanted him to stay in our district. I think that decision was made solely based on legal reasons.
Well, how did those reasons change 9 months later when you paid him $150,000 to leave?
I think part of the conversation that we had at the time was what can we legally affect now, and then how can we make sure that within the time framework we could establish enough to take that extra step of asking to leave the district. So there wasn't any further incidents that happened, if that's what you were asking, but
No, what you said was that legal constraints led you to not feel like you could terminate him after the allegations were made. Well,
but that
you
certainly
then went ahead and terminated him 9 months later with no further allegations.
Right. Yeah, why didn't we do it earlier? That's a good question. We probably should have.
The other thing that didn't happen was the Phil Winston case never got reported to OCR until the following year when we were about to publish the story of it. That occurred at the same time that you were trying to get OCR to drop its investigation of Palo. Why was OCR not informed of the Phil Winston case at the very time that school board was actively trying to get the OCR to drop its investigation of Phil Winston. I mean, of Palo.
So I think this also came from our legal team in terms of what would be private in a personnel file and what was able to be talked about. But that law was in flux at that time and is still changing. More and more transparency is happening, even in traditionally closed personnel files. But I think at the time, the guideline was this is a confidential teacher matter, and the protections were that you couldn't.
You couldn't inform a federal agency that was conducting an investigation into your sexual harassment?
I don't know that that's true. I don't know that that's true. They weren't notified.
No, they were not notified. That's been established. They were not notified until early the next year, within a few weeks before we published the story about Phil Winston.
Yeah, I don't have the details in front of me, so we can argue about it here.
And another one of those, the sexual misconduct cases involving a teacher at Ohlone Elementary School. There was some disagreement over what and when and how much the principal of Ohlone, Nikki Smith, knew about this particular teacher. The police said that they came and met with her well before it was disclosed, so the district even found out that he was facing these allegations. Do you believe that Nikki Smith should stay at Ohlone, given the fact that she didn't immediately disclose the fact that she'd been interviewed by police about this?
That was a huge mistake. If the police comes to your school, you notify the district office. That's just a given. That was a huge mistake. And the board was very divided on how to move forward with it. And I think we want to allow for some mistakes. People are human in our district. We want people to learn from their mistakes, and we want to give them opportunities to correct. She had done a lot of work once everything came out in terms of supporting her community, handling issues that came up, putting students first, talking with families, bringing in outside experts to support the community, the teachers, the kids. We had, to have the superintendent have very serious conversations with her. I think the decision for her to stay was not made lightly.
Maybe a good place to end, and we are out of time here, is a question about kids and something that they're concerned about, and that's the homework policy.
Yeah.
The district adopted this homework policy in 2012, so we're 4 years into it. There's yet to be developed any really good method of determining whether it's being followed or not. And there was a time after the last suicide cluster, that Superintendent McGee made a pretty big deal about this and basically directed the teachers to conform with the homework policy. Still with no data to show whether or not that's happened. Everybody seems to now, or at least many of you seem to now be ready to put this on the lower priority list. At the retreat in June, you said you don't think this is a board matter any longer. Superintendent McGee said he didn't think it warranted being a board goal. What is it that has you all believing that the implementation of the homework policy is no longer a concern to students?
I think homework is a concern for students and families. I think it's always going to be an issue. I think the reason why I think it's been successful is that in student conversations that I've had at both high schools and in conversations with families, and I have a 10th grader at Gunn right now, I have heard a lot of feedback about how students have less homework. Now, this is totally anecdotal, and we need to figure out ways of getting more of that information. And the student surveys is one good step in that direction after the courses. But with my own son, I can see certainly it's well within the homework policy range. And now he's a sophomore, so he hasn't done any AP classes. I don't know if he will or not. But I've heard in PTA meetings, in site council meetings, and in student meetings when I go talk to the SEC or the ASB, that they do feel like teachers are trying to follow those guidelines more. So anecdotally, I can tell you in the conversations I've had at the school sites, it feels less intense than it did.
Well, why would we change our view of the priority of that without any hard data? I mean, why have a policy for 4 years and not collect any data that gives you some specific recognition of whether it's time to?
Yeah, I don't think it's fair to say we haven't collected any data.
Well, you have
because
student
we do
surveys, and they show continuation of concern about homework.
in some of the classes, and we do need to look at those classes for sure. But I have heard from teachers that one teacher said, you know, a lot of my student surveys said that they felt like this class had too much homework, and not one of them has come up to me to say that. So either I'm intimidating, or they don't feel like they can talk to me about it, and the student survey was the way that I got that information.
Mm-hmm.
So it is good in terms of building awareness for the individual teacher, and it's good in terms of students having an anonymous way of communicating back with their teachers. I think that's going to be very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that I find it difficult to say, okay, well, this class has about 3 hours of homework is because some students, like my son, who's a slower processor, he will take a lot more than that to do maybe a certain assignment or not. But his teachers so far have been very accommodating in terms of, okay, well, then let's modify the homework load in terms of what he can accomplish. And
Probably helps that his last name is Emberling, and his mom is a school board member.
I find it very awkward to be a parent.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Member. And so I try never to overstep as much as possible around that. But I will advocate for my son when I feel it's necessary. And I have in the past, and they've been accommodating. And I have heard from others that they've also accommodated as needed. But I do think it's difficult to put a particular number on it. A teacher estimates how much it is. Now, what I have noticed is that teachers are estimating a lot more how much the assignments are going to take. So they're starting to put it more in the syllabi. They're starting to sort of think about it and estimate it more. And all of that came from this great homework policy committee and the work that was done there. So I do think that we elevated it to the level of policy. We have talked about it, and we've started to change culture around it in the district. You know, culture change takes time, but I am starting to hear a lot more positive feedback than I ever have in the 4 years. So that's what makes me feel like it is having a positive effect on our students.
To Bill's question about why wouldn't we gather hard data,
Yeah.
would you support some sort of broader initiative to get a handle on not just individual classes, but how student load is now with some hard data, and maybe a year from now, you know, to see what kind of trend?
Like what kind of
So gathering.
measure were you thinking?
Right, well, that's my question for you.
Right.
Do you see a way of getting the larger?
Outside of the student course feedback?
Yeah, one course and how much time spent.
Well, students could log it, right? We could have a log form where students log each night, or an online, app or something that.
Well, you actually have students I think it's at Palo, that have put up their own website for students to log in their time.
Oh, have they? Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there hadn't been any effort on the part of the administration to do that, so they've taken matters into their own hands.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think, why not get as much information as possible? I think we have a lot of priorities that we want to work on, and, for me, equity, the MATD is going to rise, this special ed report. I really want us to focus on having more supports in place, the literacy, math intervention specialists, and where are we working on that? There's only so much, right, that we can handle at any one time. So I guess that's why other things have risen to the top of my agenda.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.